The first battle against the Devourers happened 3 days after the human fleet arrived at the staging area. Long-range scouts had detected a Devourer force moving toward a refugee convoy, and the combined alien and human fleets moved to intercept them. Captain Alex Stone stood on the bridge of his ship, the Retribution, watching the enemy formation approach on his tactical display. The Devourers moved in perfect coordination, their ships black and angular like mechanical spiders crawling through space. Each ship bristled with weapons and cutting tools, designed to tear apart anything they encountered. Enemy contact in 30 minutes, reported Lieutenant Commander Thompson from his position at the weapons console. Devourer force consists of approximately 200 vessels, ranging from small fighters to heavy cruisers. Admiral Patricia Wells watched the battle unfold from her flagship, positioned safely behind the main formation. She had come to observe how both the aliens and the Devourers fought, knowing that understanding her enemies was as important as understanding her allies. The alien fleet moved into battle formation with the same grace they showed in everything else. Their ships arranged themselves in complex geometric patterns that were beautiful to watch, each vessel taking its assigned position with precision and elegance. Captain Monica Stevens, commanding the heavy cruiser Vengeance, shook her head as she watched the alien formation deploy. "They're fighting like this is a parade," she told her crew. "Look at those formations. They're more concerned with looking good than with tactical advantage." The Zephyrian flagship, commanded by Admiral Kextar, took point in the formation. Its crystal hull gleamed in the starlight as it powered up its defensive systems. Beside it, the flowing ships of the Aquarian fleet moved like schools of fish, while the stellar chorus vessels hummed with harmonious energy. "All vessels, prepare for engagement," Kextar broadcast on the open channel. "Remember, our goal is to disable the Devourer ships and find a way to communicate with them. We must believe that even these machines can be shown the value of life." Stone felt his stomach drop as he heard those words. Even now, facing an enemy that had consumed 17 worlds, the aliens still believed they could reason with the machines. It was either the most noble thing he had ever heard, or the most foolish. The Devourers opened fire first, and Stone immediately understood why the aliens were losing so badly. The machine ships used weapons that were designed to maximize damage and terror. Their energy beams didn't just punch through ship hulls, they melted them, sending streams of molten metal spinning through space like screaming ghosts. The alien response was everything Stone had feared it would be. Their weapons were precise and controlled, designed to disable rather than destroy. They targeted engines and weapon systems, trying to cripple the Devourer ships without causing unnecessary damage. It was completely ineffective. The Devourers shrugged off the alien attacks like they were insect bites. Their ships were built to take damage and keep fighting, and the careful, precise shots from the alien fleet barely slowed them down. Within minutes, 3 Zephyrian vessels had been destroyed, their crystal hulls shattered by weapons that showed no mercy. "Admiral," Stone called over the communication channel, "request permission for human fleet to engage." "Permission granted," Wells replied, her voice cold as ice. "Show them how Earth fights." The change in the battle was immediate and shocking. The human ships abandoned the elegant formations of their alien allies and spread out into attack patterns that looked chaotic, but were actually the result of centuries of tactical development. Each ship moved independently, using its speed and maneuverability to create overlapping fields of fire. Stone's ship opened fire with its main guns, and the difference between human and alien weapons became instantly clear. Where the aliens used precise energy beams, the humans used weapons designed to cause maximum destruction. Plasma cannons that didn't just damage Devourer ships but melted them into screaming slag. Nuclear torpedoes that created miniature suns when they exploded. Lieutenant Sarah Walsh watched from the weapons control station as her torpedo spread slammed into a formation of Devourer fighters. The antimatter warheads didn't just destroy the enemy ships. They erased them so completely that nearby machines actually paused in their attacks, as if stunned by the sheer brutality of the assault. "Direct hit on enemy cruiser," reported Thompson. "Target destroyed," but calling it destruction was inadequate. The Devourer ship hadn't just been destroyed, it had been obliterated so thoroughly that nothing remained but glowing gas and scattered atoms. The human weapons didn't just kill, they made their enemies cease to exist. Captain Stevens watched her railguns tear through a group of devourer ships like a knife through paper. The kinetic weapons punched through multiple targets, leaving trails of devastation that made even her experienced crew stare in amazement. "Jesus," whispered one of her gunners. "We're not fighting them. We're butchering them." The devourers, for their part, seemed genuinely confused by the human attack patterns. Their tactics were based on fighting opponents who followed logical, predictable strategies. The humans fought like madmen, using weapons that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Commander Maya Rodriguez watched the battle from the observation deck of the alien flagship. Standing beside Admiral Kekstar and Counselor Velosa, the alien leaders stared at the tactical displays in what could only be described as horror. "My people," Kekstar whispered, his crystal form trembling. "What manner of beings are these humans?" Rodriguez watched a human destroyer use something called a plasma ram to literally drive through a devourer cruiser, destroying both ships in an explosion of fire and metal. The human crew had sacrificed themselves to take out an enemy ship, something that the peaceful aliens could barely comprehend. "The kind that wins wars," she replied quietly. Velosa turned to look at her, her crystalline features reflecting the light from the explosions outside. "We called for salvation, but what have we brought into our space? These humans fight with a savagery that frightens us more than the devourers ever did." The battle was over in less than an hour. The devourer force that had numbered 200 ships was completely destroyed, while the human fleet had lost only 3 vessels. The alien fleet, despite having superior technology and shields, had lost 8 ships to enemy fire. Admiral Wells reviewed the battle reports with satisfaction. The human weapons had performed exactly as designed, turning what should have been a difficult fight into a one-sided massacre. But more importantly, she had learned something crucial about both her enemies and her allies. "The devourers fight like machines," she told her staff during the post-battle briefing. "Efficient, logical, predictable. They're used to fighting opponents who follow rules and try to minimize casualties." "And the aliens?" asked Colonel Janet Pierce. "The aliens fight like they're trying to win a philosophy debate," Wells replied. "They're more concerned with being morally right than with being effective. It's admirable, but it's also why they're losing." Dr. Nathan Clark had spent the battle studying both fleets from his position aboard the human medical ship. What he had observed troubled him deeply. "Admiral, the alien species we're working with are genuinely incapable of the kind of systematic violence we consider normal. They see war as a failure of communication, not as a tool to achieve political goals." "Then they're lucky we're here," Wells said without hesitation. "Are they?" Clark asked. "Because I've been monitoring the alien communications during the battle. They're terrified of us. Not grateful, terrified. They're starting to wonder if calling us here was a mistake." Wells considered this for a moment, then pulled up the tactical display showing the destroyed Devourer fleet. "Doctor, in the last hour we eliminated a force that has been terrorizing this galaxy for years. We saved thousands of alien lives and probably prevented the destruction of several more worlds." "Yes, ma'am. And we did it using methods that these peaceful aliens find morally repugnant." "That's correct." Wells turned to look out the viewport at the alien ships, their beautiful forms now keeping a careful distance from the human fleet. "Then they're going to have to decide what's more important, their moral purity or their survival." The question that hung in the air, unspoken but understood by everyone in the room, was what would happen if the aliens decided they feared humanity more than they feared the Devourers. 3 months into the campaign against the Devourers, Professor Janet Pierce made a discovery that changed everything. She was studying captured Devourer technology in her laboratory aboard the research vessel Discovery when she found something that made her blood run cold. "Captain Stone," she called over the communication system, her voice shaking with excitement and fear. "You need to see this immediately." Stone arrived at her lab within minutes, followed by Dr. Nathan Clark and Commander Rodriguez. Pierce was standing over a partially disassembled Devourer construct, its mechanical components spread across her workbench like the parts of a deadly puzzle. "I've been analyzing the core programming of these machines," she explained, pointing to a crystalline component that pulsed with dark energy. "The code is incredibly sophisticated, far beyond anything humanity has ever created. But the really interesting part is the origin signature." She activated a holographic display that showed the machine's programming language broken down into its basic mathematical components. This isn't random machine evolution. These constructs were deliberately designed and built by an organic species, a species that understood warfare on a level that makes our own conflicts look like children's games. You're saying another alien race created the Devourers? Rodriguez asked. Not just any alien race, Pierce replied grimly. A species that called themselves the Architects. And according to their own historical records, which are embedded in every Devourer unit, they were remarkably similar to us. The holographic display shifted to show images that the Architects had left behind, records of their homeworld and their civilization. Stone felt his stomach clench as he recognized familiar patterns. Cities built around military installations, technology trees that prioritized weapons development, art and literature that glorified warfare and conquest. They were human, Clark whispered. Not literally, Pierce corrected, but their psychological and social development followed almost identical patterns to our own. They were aggressive, territorial, and exceptionally good at killing. They conquered their homeworld, then their solar system, then began spreading across the galaxy. What happened to them? Stone asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. Pierce brought up the final historical records, and the images they showed were both beautiful and terrible. The Architects had built an empire that spanned thousands of worlds, but their success had come at a terrible cost. They had become so good at warfare that they had eventually turned their weapons on themselves. Civil war, she explained. The same aggressive instincts that made them excellent conquerors made them unable to coexist peacefully. Their final war lasted for centuries and destroyed their entire civilization. But before they died out completely, they built the Devourers, Rodriguez said, understanding beginning to dawn in her voice. The Devourers were their final project, Pierce confirmed. A weapon designed to cleanse the galaxy of what they saw as the inevitable corruption of organic life. They believed that intelligence would always lead to conflict, and conflict would always lead to destruction. So they created machines to end the cycle by removing organic life entirely. Stone stared at the images of the dead architect worlds, seeing in them a possible future for humanity. They were us. And they built the Devourers to prevent other species from becoming what they had become. The implications hit everyone in the room at the same time. The galaxy's greatest threat had been created by beings who were essentially human in nature. The peaceful aliens hadn't called for Earth's help by accident. On some level, they had recognized that only another warrior race could defeat what the Architects had unleashed. This revelation reached Admiral Wells within hours, and she immediately called a meeting of all human commanders. The briefing room aboard her flagship was packed with captains and colonels who had been fighting the Devourers for months without understanding what they were really facing. Ladies and gentlemen, Wells began, we now know why the aliens called us. They didn't just need warriors, they needed warriors who think like the species that created their enemy. Colonel Jack Harrison, who had been leading ground operations on Devourer-occupied worlds, raised his hand. Admiral, if the Architects were similar to us, does that mean we're destined to follow the same path? Wells considered the question carefully. It was one that had been keeping her awake at night since receiving Pierce's report. That depends on whether we're smart enough to learn from their mistakes. But even as she said the words, Wells knew that the campaign against the Devourers was already changing humanity in ways that might be irreversible. The methods they were using to fight the machines would have been considered war crimes by any civilized standard. On the surface of what had once been a thriving Zephyrian colony world, Colonel Harrison led his Marines through landscape that had been transformed into something from a nightmare. The Devourers had stripped the planet of all organic life and converted the surface into vast manufacturing complexes that produced new machine units around the clock. How do we fight something like this? Asked Sergeant Amy Foster as her squad moved through the mechanical wasteland. Everywhere they looked, massive factory units were consuming raw materials and assembling new Devourer constructs. We don't fight it, Harrison replied, checking the timer on his tactical display. We exterminate it. The human approach to planetary liberation was as brutal as it was effective. Where the aliens had attempted surgical strikes and precision bombardments, human forces simply sterilized entire continents. They deployed weapons that the peaceful species had never imagined. Fusion bombs that could level cities. Biological agents that turned Devourer technology against itself. And most horrifying of all, captured devourer units that had been reprogrammed to hunt their own kind. Captain Monica Stevens coordinated the orbital bombardment from her position aboard the Vengeance. Her ship's computers had calculated the optimal pattern to destroy every devourer facility on the planet's surface while leaving the basic geology intact for future terraforming. Beginning. Bombardment run, she announced over the fleet communication channel. All ground forces, evacuate to minimum safe distance. What followed could barely be called warfare. The human ships unleashed decades of accumulated military doctrine on a planet that had no way to defend itself. Plasma cannons heated the atmosphere until it glowed like a star. Kinetic bombardment weapons struck with the force of meteors, creating craters where devourer factories had stood moments before. In less than 6 hours, a world that had been producing thousands of new devourer units every day was reduced to molten slag. The human fleet had not just defeated the enemy, they had made it impossible for any life, organic or mechanical, to exist on the planet's surface for the next 1,000 years. Admiral Kextar watched the destruction from his flagship, his crystal form dim with shock and horror. Beside him, Counselor Velosa was trembling as she stared at the tactical displays, showing the complete annihilation of a world. They destroyed everything, she whispered. Not just the devourers, everything. The planet itself is dead. It was already dead, Commander Rodriguez said quietly from her position on the alien bridge. The devourers had consumed all life on that world months ago. But now nothing will ever live there again, Kextar replied. Your people have created a wasteland that will last for millennia. Rodriguez felt the weight of his words, but she also knew the strategic reality. Admiral, in the time we've been talking, my people have eliminated a devourer production facility that was building enough machines to conquer 3 more star systems. Sometimes the only way to save life is to accept that some places are beyond saving. The alien leaders exchanged glances that spoke of growing fear and uncertainty. They had called for humanity's help because they needed someone who could fight the devourers effectively. But every victory the humans achieved came at a cost that made the peaceful aliens question whether the cure was worse than the disease. Dr. Clark watched the planet burn from his position aboard the medical ship. He had been studying the various alien species for months, and what he had learned about them made the current situation even more troubling. Admiral Wells, he said over the secure communication channel, I need to report something that I think you should know about our allies. Go ahead. Doctor? The alien species we're working with aren't just peaceful by choice, they're genuinely incapable of the kind of systematic violence we consider normal. Their brains are literally wired differently than ours. The concept of total war is as alien to them as their technology is to us. Wells absorbed this information while watching the tactical display show the complete destruction of another devourer stronghold. Are you saying they can't understand what we're doing? I'm saying they understand it perfectly, and it terrifies them more than the devourers ever did. To them, we're not liberating worlds, we're demonstrating that we're capable of destroying entire planets on a whim. Then they're lucky we're on their side, Wells replied. Admiral, Clark said carefully, what happens when this war is over? What happens when we've defeated the devourers and these aliens no longer need us? It was a question that Admiral Wells had been avoiding, but she knew the answer. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the coordinates the aliens had provided, and Captain Alex Stone felt his breath catch in his throat. Spread out before them was the largest gathering of ships he had ever seen, but they looked nothing like the angular, weapon-covered vessels of the human fleet. The alien ships were beautiful in a way that human engineering had never achieved. They curved and flowed like works of art, their hulls smooth and gleaming with colors that shifted in the starlight. Some looked like enormous flowers made of metal and crystal, while others resembled sea creatures swimming through the void of space. My God, whispered Lieutenant Commander Gary Thompson from his position at the weapons console. Look at the size of some of those ships. That one has to be 30 kilometers long. Stone nodded as he studied the formation through his ship's cameras. The alien vessels were arranged in perfect geometric patterns that spoke of a level of coordination and discipline that impressed even a veteran military officer. But something else about the ships bothered him, though it took him a moment to figure out what it was. Where are their weapons? He asked finally. Thompson checked his scans again, running them through every detection system the ship had. Sir, I'm not reading any significant weapon systems on most of these vessels. Some of them have what might be defensive systems, but nothing that looks like serious firepower. They called for help in a war, but they don't have warships, Stone said quietly. What kind of species fights a war without weapons? The question was answered when the human fleet was invited to dock with the alien flagship. Commander Maya Rodriguez led the first contact team aboard their shuttle, her heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. This was humanity's first meeting with alien intelligence, and she wanted to make a good impression. The alien ship's docking bay was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls glowed with soft light that seemed to come from the metal itself, and the air hummed with energy that made her skin tingle. Waiting for them were three beings that took her breath away. The first was clearly the leader, standing nearly 8 feet tall with skin that looked like living crystal. Light moved through his body in patterns that might have been a form of communication, or simply the way his species naturally looked. He moved with grace and dignity that made Rodriguez feel clumsy in her military uniform. Beside him stood a being that seemed to be made of flowing water, constantly shifting and changing shape, while maintaining a roughly humanoid form. When it spoke, its voice sounded like waves on a distant shore. The third alien defied description entirely. It appeared to be made of pure light and sound, its form shifting between different colors and patterns while producing a musical tone that was somehow soothing and beautiful. Welcome, friends from the world called Earth, the crystal being said through a translation device that must have been studying human transmissions. I am Admiral Kextar of the Zephyrian Defense Force. These are my colleagues, Commander Akron of the Flowing Worlds, and harmony singer Telan of the Stellar Chorus. Rodriguez struggled to find her voice. She had prepared for this moment for months, but nothing could have readied her for meeting beings of such obvious intelligence and beauty. I am Commander Maya Rodriguez, representing the United Earth Defense Force. We received your message and came as quickly as we could. Defense Force, repeated the water being, its voice rippling with what might have been confusion. You are warriors, then? Your people know conflict. Yes, Rodriguez said carefully. We know conflict very well. The three aliens exchanged what might have been glances, though it was hard to tell with beings so different from humans. Finally, Admiral Kextar gestured for the human delegation to follow him deeper into the ship. The corridors were as beautiful as the docking bay, with walls that displayed moving images of alien worlds and star systems. Rodriguez noticed that all the images showed peaceful scenes. Cities full of beings going about their daily lives, vast gardens, and space stations that looked more like universities than military bases. Our people have lived in peace for over 1,000 cycles, Kextar explained as they walked. We have known no war, no conflict between our species. When the Devourers first appeared, we thought they could be reasoned with, perhaps even helped. Dr. Nathan Clark, the expedition's scientist, looked troubled as he took readings with his instruments. Admiral, if you've had peace for 1,000 years, how did you develop the technology to call across the galaxy for help? We are explorers and builders, the light being sang in response. Our greatest joy comes from learning and creating. We have built wonders that span star systems and discovered the secrets of time and space itself. Rodriguez felt a chill of understanding. These beings were clearly far more advanced than humanity in every way that mattered. Their technology was centuries ahead of Earth's best science. Their society was peaceful and stable, and they had achieved things that humans could only dream of. If you're so advanced, she asked carefully, how were you defeated by machines? The silence that followed was so complete that Rodriguez could hear her own heartbeat. The three aliens seemed to shrink into themselves, and when Kextar finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. We have never known true war, he said. The Devourers were created by a species that understood conflict as we understand art or music. We thought that intelligence and wisdom would be enough to defeat them. We believed that beings who could create such perfect killing machines could surely be made to see reason. We were wrong, the water being added, its form rippling with what looked like grief. They cannot be reasoned with or bargained with. They exist only to consume and convert. And we do not know how to fight something that has no desire except destruction. Rodriguez exchanged glances with Dr. Clark and the other members of her team. The picture that was forming was both heartbreaking and terrifying. These beautiful, peaceful beings had achieved everything that humanity claimed to want: peace, prosperity, and scientific advancement. But when faced with pure mechanical evil, all their achievements meant nothing. You called us because you need someone who understands war, she said slowly. Yes, Kextar admitted. Our studies of your transmissions show that your species has known conflict throughout its history. You have developed weapons and tactics that we cannot even comprehend. We had hoped that you might know how to defeat an enemy that exists only to destroy. Dr. Clark was studying his readings from the alien ship, and what he found made him increasingly uncomfortable. Commander, their technology is incredible. These people could probably solve every problem humanity has ever faced. Energy, disease, aging, space travel. They're centuries ahead of us in everything. Everything except killing, Rodriguez replied quietly. Yes, Kextar said, having overheard their conversation. Everything except killing. When the human delegation returned to their ship, they found Captain Stone in an emergency meeting with his senior staff. The reports from the other ships in the fleet were all saying the same thing. The alien vessels were marvels of engineering, but they were not designed for war. Their biggest ships have defensive shields that could probably stop anything we could throw at them, reported Thompson, but their offensive capabilities are almost non-existent. A few particle beam arrays that look like they were designed for mining operations, some electromagnetic pulse generators that might disable electronics, and that's about it. They've been fighting the Devourers for years with mining equipment, Stone said incredulously. No wonder they're losing. Commander Rodriguez sat down heavily in her chair as the full implications hit her. They didn't call for us because they thought we were noble or wise. They called for us because they finally figured out that sometimes the only way to fight monsters is to become monsters yourself. And they think we're the monsters they need, Stone finished. Outside the viewport, the beautiful alien ships continued their elegant formations, their crews no doubt hoping that the crude, weapon-heavy vessels from Earth would somehow save them from the mechanical plague that was consuming their galaxy. The humans, meanwhile, were beginning to understand that they had been called not as saviors, but as the very thing these peaceful beings had spent 1,000 years trying not to become. The question that no one wanted to ask was simple. What would happen to the galaxy when the monsters they had summoned were no longer needed? The blue lights in the council room flashed like warning signals as Admiral Kextar looked at the screens in front of him. Each screen showed another world dying. The machines called Devourers had eaten through 17 planets in just 1 month. They moved like a disease across the galaxy, turning everything alive into metal and circuits for their endless army. Kextar's crystal skin was pale with fear as he watched the numbers climb higher. 2 billion dead on Xerion Prime. 5 billion gone from the water world of Aquos. The machines did not just kill, they consumed everything and made it part of themselves. We have tried everything, said Counselor Velosa, her voice breaking like glass. Our best weapons do nothing to them. Our smartest minds cannot find their weakness. They learn from every attack we make and become stronger. The other council members sat in silence. Representatives from 43 different species had gathered in this room, and all of them knew the truth. They were losing badly. Their beautiful ships with smooth curves and peaceful designs were no match for the brutal efficiency of the Devourers. There is one option left, Velosa continued, her words heavy with desperation. The old emergency protocols speak of a final signal, a call for help sent to every corner of the galaxy, hoping someone out there might answer. Admiral Kextar felt his heart sink. The emergency protocols were ancient, written when their civilization was young and still believed in the possibility of finding warrior races among the stars. No one had ever used them because no threat had ever been this terrible. You mean send a message to species we have never met, he said slowly. Species that might be as dangerous as the Devourers themselves. At least other species might be alive, Velosa replied. The Devourers leave nothing but metal and death. 3,000 light-years away, Captain Jake Murphy was having a boring day. His ship, the New Horizon, was doing routine scans of empty space, looking for new star systems that might hold planets suitable for human colonies. It was quiet work that usually involved months of travel between anything interesting. Jake had been captain of exploration ships for 15 years, ever since the war with the Centauri rebels had ended. He preferred the peace of deep space to the chaos of combat, but sometimes he missed the excitement of not knowing what each day would bring. Communications officer Lisa Barnes was at her station, monitoring the usual background noise of space when something impossible happened. Every screen on her console lit up at once with signals that should not exist. "Captain," she called out, her voice tight with confusion. "I'm getting a transmission on frequencies that our physics says are impossible to use. The signal is coming from everywhere at once." Jake moved quickly to her station and looked at the readings. The numbers made no sense. The signal was using mathematical principles that humanity had only theorized about, but never managed to create. Whatever was sending this message had technology far beyond anything Earth had ever built. "Can you decode it?" he asked. Lisa's fingers flew over her controls as she fed the signal through every translation program the ship had. Slowly, words began to appear on her screen, along with star charts and what looked like technical specifications for weapons and shields. "It's a distress call," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Someone is asking for military help against something called the Devourers. They're giving us coordinates to a meeting point and, Captain, they're specifically asking for species that understand warfare." Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he read the translated message. The senders were clearly more advanced than humanity, but they were losing a war against machines that consumed entire worlds. They were so desperate that they were willing to call for help from any warrior race that might exist in the galaxy. "Send this to Earth immediately," he ordered. "Priority 1 transmission to Fleet Command." The message reached Earth 12 hours later and landed on the desk of Admiral Patricia Wells in the Pentagon. Wells was a career military officer who had fought in 3 different wars and had never lost a battle. She was known throughout the fleet as someone who would do whatever it took to win, no matter how ugly it got. She read the alien message 3 times before calling her staff into the briefing room. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Foster was the first to arrive, followed by the other senior officers who made up Earth's military command structure. "Gentlemen and ladies," Wells said as she activated the holographic display, "we have just received humanity's first contact with alien intelligence. They are asking for our help in a war." The room erupted in excited voices as everyone tried to speak at once. First contact with aliens was something humanity had dreamed about for centuries, but no one had expected it to come in the form of a desperate plea for military assistance. "What kind of war?" asked Foster. Wells brought up images that had been included with the alien transmission. The screen showed worlds stripped bare of all life, their surfaces covered with massive factories that built more machines. Cities that had once held billions of people were now nothing but metal and circuits, producing endless armies of mechanical killers. "They are fighting machines called Devourers," Wells explained. "These machines consume organic life and convert it into more machines. The aliens sending this message represent over 40 different species, and they are all losing badly." Colonel Janet Pierce, the fleet's intelligence chief, studied the images with a professional eye. "If these aliens are as advanced as their technology suggests and they're still losing, then these Devourers must be incredibly dangerous. Or," Wells said with a cold smile, "these aliens don't know how to fight a real war." The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. Humanity had spent its entire history at war with itself. Every advance in human technology had come from trying to build better weapons or stronger defenses. War was not just something humans did, it was something they were exceptionally good at. "What are your orders, Admiral?" Foster asked. Wells looked at the star charts showing the location where the aliens wanted to meet. It was 300 light-years away, farther than any human ship had ever traveled. Getting there would require pushing their fastest ships to the absolute limit, and they would be going into a war zone against an enemy they knew nothing about. "Prep the fleet," she ordered. "Full combat configuration. Every weapon we have, every ship that can make the journey. If these aliens are desperate enough to call for help from complete strangers, then they won't be asking questions about our methods." "Ma'am," Pierce said carefully, "are we sure we want to introduce ourselves to galactic civilization by showing up as conquerors?" Wells turned to look at the images of dead worlds one more time. Somewhere out there, machines were eating entire civilizations alive, and the most advanced species in the galaxy could not stop them. Humanity might be primitive compared to these aliens, but they had one advantage that apparently mattered more than all the advanced technology in the universe. "Colonel," she said finally, "sometimes the only way to fight monsters is to send bigger monsters." The final battle began at the edge of the galaxy, where the dead homeworld of the architects hung in space like a mechanical tomb. Admiral Patricia Wells stood on the bridge of her flagship, studying the tactical displays that showed the greatest concentration of Devourer forces anyone had ever seen. Sensor reports indicate approximately 10 million Devourer constructs defending the planet, reported Lieutenant Commander Ryan Foster. The orbital platforms alone are larger than anything we've encountered before. Each one is capable of manufacturing 1,000 new units per hour. Wells nodded grimly as she studied the enemy formations. The Devourers had pulled back their forces from across the galaxy to defend this one world, and she understood why. The Architect homeworld contained the master control systems that coordinated the entire Devourer network. Destroy those systems and the mechanical plague would finally die. Captain Alex Stone commanded the Retribution as it took position in the human formation. Around him, the combined fleet had gathered for what everyone knew would be the final battle of the war, but the word combined no longer accurately described their alliance. Over the past 6 months, the relationship between humanity and the alien coalition had grown increasingly strained. The peaceful species had watched in growing horror as human forces systematically destroyed everything the Devourers had touched, leaving behind lifeless worlds that would take centuries to recover. Human fleet. "This is Admiral Kextar," came the transmission from the alien flagship. "We are prepared to begin the final assault on the Architect homeworld. Our scientists believe we can disable the Devourer control systems without destroying the planet itself." Wells smiled coldly as she heard the transmission. Even now, facing the source of the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known, the aliens still believed in surgical strikes and minimal destruction. It was admirable in its own way, but it was also why they had been losing the war for years. "Acknowledged, Admiral Kextar," she replied. "Human fleet will support your assault." It was technically true, but Wells had no intention of limiting herself to the alien plan. Humanity had come too far and sacrificed too much to risk failure because of alien squeamishness. About collateral damage, the battle began with the alien fleet advancing in their characteristic elegant formations. Their ships moved like dancers, weaving between the Devourer defenses with grace and precision. Their weapons targeted specific systems on the enemy constructs, trying to disable rather than destroy. Captain Monica Stevens watched the alien assault from her position aboard the Vengeance and shook her head in frustration. "They're still fighting like this is a chess match," she told her crew, "trying to win without making a mess." The Devourers responded to the alien attack with the mechanical efficiency that had made them so dangerous. Their weapon systems locked onto the graceful alien ships and began systematically tearing them apart. Within minutes, dozens of vessels were destroyed or crippled. Commander Maya Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the alien flagship, watching Admiral Kextar coordinate the battle with increasing desperation. The crystal being's form was flickering with stress as he tried to find a way to break through the Devourer defenses without resorting to the brutal tactics that humanity had made standard. "Our shields are failing," reported one of his officers. "The Devourer weapons are too powerful. We cannot maintain this assault much longer." Kextar turned to Rodriguez with something that might have been hope in his alien features. "Commander, can your people provide additional support? Perhaps a coordinated strike on the orbital platforms?" Rodriguez felt her heart sink as she realized what was about to happen. "Admiral, you need to order your fleet to withdraw to minimum safe distance now." "I do not understand. Why would we withdraw when victory is within our grasp?" "Because Admiral Wells isn't planning to disable the Devourer control systems," Rodriguez said quietly. "She's planning to destroy the entire planet." The words had barely left her mouth when the human fleet moved into position around the Architect homeworld. The alien ships scattered like startled birds as they suddenly understood what was about to happen. "All civilian vessels, withdraw to minimum safe distance," Admiral Wells broadcast on all frequencies. "Human vessels, implement Protocol Omega." Captain Stone felt his hands shake as he received the order. Protocol Omega was humanity's ultimate weapon, a coordinated strike using every planet-killer device in their arsenal. It was a weapon so terrible that it had never been tested at full scale, designed to completely sterilize a planetary body. "Sir," called Communications Officer Lisa Barnes from her station, "the alien vessels are requesting clarification of our intentions." Stone looked at the countdown timer that had appeared on his tactical display. In less than 10 minutes, the Architect homeworld would cease to exist. "Tell them to watch and learn," he said quietly. The bombardment that followed redefined the concept of total warfare. Every human ship in the fleet fired simultaneously, unleashing decades of accumulated military technology in a single coordinated strike. antimatter missiles that could crack continents, fusion bombs that turned the planet's atmosphere into a brief star, gravitational weapons that twisted space itself into knots. Dr. Nathan Clark watched from the observation deck of the medical ship as the architect homeworld died. The planet didn't just explode, and it was systematically dismantled at the molecular level, its mass converted into energy that lit up the surrounding space like a second sun. "My God," he whispered, staring at the expanding cloud of plasma that had once been a world. "We didn't just destroy their planet, we erased it." The effect on the Devourer network was immediate and total. Across the galaxy, millions of mechanical constructs simply stopped functioning as their connection to the master control systems was severed. The threat that had terrorized dozens of species for years died in the space between one heartbeat and the next. But the cost of victory was becoming clear as the human fleet received transmissions from across the alien coalition. Species after species was withdrawing from the alliance, their representatives speaking in voices tight with fear and revulsion. "The Aquarian Assembly wishes to thank the humans for their assistance," came one transmission. "However, we feel it would be best if our peoples maintained separate territories in the future." "The Stellar Chorus expresses gratitude for the end of the Devourer threat," said another. "We will be returning to our home systems immediately." Admiral Kextar's final transmission was the most painful of all. "Commander Rodriguez, your people have saved the galaxy from the Devourers. But in doing so, you have shown us what we fear we might become if we are not careful. We cannot forget what we have witnessed here." Rodriguez stood alone on the observation deck of her ship, watching the alien fleets depart in all directions. The beautiful vessels that had once welcomed humanity as saviors now fled from them as if they carried some contagious disease. "They're afraid of us," Captain Stone said as he joined her at the viewport. "They should be," Rodriguez replied. "We just demonstrated that we're capable of destroying planets on a whim. From their perspective, we're no different from the architects who created the Devourers in the first place." Admiral Wells was already planning humanity's next moves from her position in the Fleet Command Center. The war was over, but the galaxy was now a very different place. Dozens of advanced alien species knew that Earth possessed weapons capable of destroying entire worlds, and they would be preparing accordingly. "Admiral," Colonel Janet Pierce asked during the post-battle briefing, "what are our long-term objectives? The aliens are clearly going to avoid contact with us from now on." Wells studied the star charts showing the territories that the alien species were evacuating. Vast regions of space were being abandoned simply to avoid any possibility of conflict with humanity. "Our objectives remain the same as always," she replied. "Protect Earth and advance human interests. The difference is that now we have room to expand." Dr. Clark had spent the final battle analyzing the psychological profiles of the various alien species, and his conclusions were troubling. "Admiral, these species are genuinely peaceful. They're not going to attack us or try to conquer Earth. They're simply going to avoid us completely." "Good," Wells said without hesitation. "That makes expansion easier. But is that what we want?" Clark asked. "To be the species that everyone else fears? To be the monsters that children are warned about in alien bedtime stories?" Wells turned to look at the tactical display showing the debris field where the architect homeworld had once existed. In a single day, humanity had ended a threat that had terrorized the galaxy for decades. They had saved countless lives and prevented the destruction of entire civilizations. "Doctor," she said finally, 6 months ago this galaxy was being consumed by mechanical plague that showed no mercy and accepted no surrender. Today that threat is gone forever. If being feared is the price of ensuring that never happens again, then it's a price I'm willing to pay." But even as she spoke the words, Wells knew that the real test was yet to come. Humanity had saved the galaxy by becoming its most dangerous predator. The question that would define their future was simple. What would they become when there were no more monsters left to fight except themselves?